Deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains along the James River lies one of the world's natural wonders, the Natural Bridge. This geological formation was deemed the Bridge of God by the Monacan Indian Nation, surveyed by a young George Washington, once owned by Thomas Jefferson, and was traversed by soldiers during the American Revolution, War of 1812, and the Civil War. Virginia's Natural Bridge has a rich history dating back hundreds of years.
There are a lot of untold stories here in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the Natural Bridge is one of those.
A tributary of the James River, Cedar Creek, carved a gorge in the mountainous limestone terrain, forming a natural arch, 215 feet high, spanning 90 feet. It mainly consists of horizontal limestone strata, the remnants of a cave through which the creek once flowed. The caverns at Natural Bridge descend 34 stories, making them the deepest caverns on America's east coast. Natural Bridge has been designated a Virginia Historic Landmark, as well as a National Historic Landmark.
In its beauty, in its simplicity, I think it is vital to preserve it, to give an understanding to people of what the region looked like. When you go and you walk down the paths, you see what it was like back then, and you see the huge trees on the top of the bridge, and you see the splendor of it, and you can, because there hasn't been any development, you can admire it, and you can picture in your mind what it must have been like to take a canoe down Cedar Creek.
The Monacan Indian Nation holds the Natural Bridge as sacred. It is the site of a major victory over the Powhatan and Shawnee tribes, centuries before the arrival of the first Europeans in Virginia. The Shawnees, notorious for their cruelty, joined forces with the Powhatans, creating a formidable force. As they pushed through Virginia, they encountered the Monacan Nation, a friendlier tribe. In the year leading up to this attack, famine ravaged the Monacans, and weakened by their hunger, many of their warriors fell in battle. Facing defeat, the Monacans retreated before their opponents could finish them off. Pursued relentlessly, they sought refuge in an unknown forest and suddenly came upon a high chasm whose steep walls were made of rock. The warriors peered over, dizzied by the distance to the canyon floor where a rapid river flowed. The chasm was far too wide or deep to cross. Their swiftest scouts sought ways of escape, but none were found. Surrounded by mist, the frightened Monacans fell upon the ground and cried out to the Great Spirit to spare their lives. One of the warriors, compelled to arise, went to the edge of the cliff. He stared down at his feet, and as the mist cleared, he turned and shouted, "Our prayers have been granted us. The Great Spirit has built for us a bridge across the great abyss." The women and children passed over the bridge and took shelter in the forest beyond. The warriors, invigorated by the Great Spirit's gift, took courage, held their positions, faced their enemy, and fought victoriously. From that day forth, the Bridge of God has been revered.
The Monacan Indian Nation, what's extremely interesting about it is such a small nation. The current members are just about 2,000 or so, and it's been able to survive in a melting pot that is the United States and be able to hold its culture where so many have lost it over the years. And what the Natural Bridge offers is a chance for people to really experience that culture.
As European interest in the New World grew, so did the desire for adventure within the average man. In 1585, John White, an artist and cartographer, traveled from England to the outer banks of North Carolina under the plan of Sir Walter Raleigh. White was in Virginia for 13 months, during which he made a series of 70 watercolor drawings of indigenous people, plants, and animals. He understood that not all tribes were warring. Some, like the Monacan, were peaceful communities. Sadly, his work was not published until the 19th century.
George Washington is one of our founding fathers. We know a lot about his being a general, helping us defeat the British, but a lot of people don't realize his younger days, he was a surveyor, and that's actually what made him such a great general. Is he knew the topography of the area, he knew the ravines, all the hidden passageways, and Natural Bridge was one of those stops along the way.
As a young surveyor, George Washington came to the site in 1750 on behalf of Thomas Fairfax, 6th Lord Fairfax of Cameron. The initials GW on the wall of the bridge, 23 feet up, were carved and can still be seen today. Legend also has it that Washington threw a rock from the bottom of Cedar Creek over the bridge. Archaeologists in 1927 found a large stone bearing the initials GW and a surveyor's cross, which historians accepted as proof that he indeed surveyed the bridge. Up until the mid-1700s, no one man had ever owned Natural Bridge. Motivated by a desire to preserve the land, Thomas Jefferson purchased Natural Bridge. The original land grant, still hanging on the walls of Monticello, reads in part, "Know ye that for diverse good causes and considerations, but more especially for and in consideration of the sum of 20 shillings of good and lawful money, for our use paid to our receiver general of our revenues, in this our colony and dominion of Virginia, we have given, granted, and confirmed, and by these presents for us, our heirs and successors, do give, grant, and confirm unto Thomas Jefferson one certain tract or parcel of land containing 157 acres, lying and being in the county of Botetourt, including the Natural Bridge on Cedar Creek, a branch of the James River." Thomas Jefferson called his purchase the most sublime of nature's works. He visited the property numerous times, even during his presidency. Around 1802, he himself surveyed the land.
What I find extremely interesting about the researching Thomas Jefferson when it comes to the Natural Bridge is that there isn't a whole lot out there about it. There are very small, little minute papers, references to some of his papers. People focus here in Western Virginia mainly on Monticello and his summer getaway at Poplar Forest. But one of his most beloved areas was actually the Natural Bridge. He set up a log cabin there for individuals to go visit. He didn't want to just keep it for himself, he wanted to share it, which was very different from a lot of his other ventures, especially Poplar Forest. It was something that he could kind of get away from. And Natural Bridge was something he liked to share with other people.
On the property, he had a log cabin built and entrusted its care to an African slave and his wife. The cabin contained 2 rooms, one of which was to always remain ready for visitors. Many well-known people visited Jefferson's cabin, including John Marshall, James Monroe, Henry Clay, Sam Houston, and Martin Van Buren.
I also think it's interesting that Jefferson bought the land and his goal was to preserve the land. He never wanted to hide it away. He wanted it to be admired by all and loved by all. And he wanted to document and he wanted to preserve the bridge in all of its glory exactly the way that he found it.
During the War of 1812, 2 different men approached Jefferson about using Natural Bridge as a shot tower. He suggested they work together, but the outcome is unknown. Jefferson also leased out a tract of land to a company for the mining of saltpeter, which was processed into potassium nitrate crystals used to make gunpowder. At one point, a company representative wrote to Jefferson apologizing because 2 employees had run off with that month's profits. The same mining company also discovered what is now known as the Lost River, a deep underground spring on the property.
The 19th century, the natural wonder of the world at that time, the Natural Bridge, was something that people were interested in. They went to visit, they went to see. And you could use it in a writing and it would be so impactful, where if you used it in a book today, I don't think a lot of individuals actually know what the Natural Bridge is, and I think that's a shame.
The Natural Bridge had many visitors from all over the globe, so in 1833, a new owner erected the Forest Inn to accommodate the increasing number of patrons. Before footpaths down to the canyon bottom were cut, visitors had to climb out onto what was called Pulpit Rock. Ladies in their corsets and their bustly long gowns crept out and almost fainted because the 215-foot drop startled them so.
I would love nothing more than to go back and stand on the top and watch people attempt to climb down and carve their initials, or be bold enough to hike down the mountain in another area and trek through the forest in to see it from below when there was no path, when there is nothing but trees all around it and the rushing river below it, and feeling bold enough to climb up and see how high they could get, just to see. To me personally, I think that given my corset and my terribly uncomfortable shoes, I still would have attempted. I'd like to think that I would have attempted.
In later years, people climbing up the canyon walls would get midway up, become stuck, and have to continue all the way up to the top, while everyone below watched in horror. Once, when a group was visiting, a man very nimbly scaled the whole rock face. Soon after, they discovered he was a sailor on an ocean-going ship.
There are many accounts of women going across the top in the 1880s, even around 1900, going across the top and their companions thinking they were going to faint, getting a little nervous around the edges. But you had the occasional woman who got a little more bold, and she'd go, climbing out in all of her splendor to just look over and peer over the sides. So I think it's amazing that no one has ever allowed the culture to stop them from exploring and admiring, climbing up and down, whatever, this amazing natural bridge. It has been admired as long as people have known it was there, going all the way back to the Monacan Indian nation. It's been admired and studied and loved and preserved by people who value it for what it really is.
Many of these visitors were inspired by the sight of the Natural Bridge to create breathtaking works of art and literature, including David Johnson's 1860 painting and Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which read, "But soon the forepart of him slowly rose from the water. For an instant his whole marbleized body formed a high arch, like Virginia's Natural Bridge."
After doing my own research into the subject of the Natural Bridge and kind of why it has teetered off over the years, one of my personal theories is that one of the main reasons why visitation has lowered is not actually due to Natural Bridge itself or the great amenities that they offer. It actually has to do with the culture and life events that happened during the 20th century, mainly World War II. A lot of traveling for Europeans had ended at that time, which was the major resource of the Natural Bridge. Also just everyday travel. During times of recession, hardship during the economy, tourism is one of the first things to fall. The Natural Bridge at that time was a major tourist location. And then after World War II, you had train travel and a bunch of different new locations that had been offered across the ocean, Normandy, things like that. And that's where people's interests had changed. And I think Natural Bridge, unfortunately, was kind of left behind with the 19th century locations, where the 20th century had new offerings. And I feel it's a shame, actually.
Today, one can still visit the long-hidden yet amazing natural wonder, Thomas Jefferson's most sublime of nature's works, which includes the Natural Bridge, walking trail, authentic Monacan Indian village, cavern tours, and the beautiful Natural Bridge Hotel.
When you go and you sit and you admire the bridge, that you admire Jefferson and his desire to preserve it for that very reason.